Hey everyone, how's it going? You're watching Kogi Lumpur, and in today's video I wanted to go over the differences between the Malaysians who live/work in Singapore. If you've been watching my videos, you might have picked up on the fact that I was born in Malaysia and have recently completed what is the slowest world tour ever by living in different countries across different continents, and have recently moved back to this part of the world that is Southeast Asia. One of the things that I used to get when I was living abroad was, "Hey, you're the Korean American guy, right?" And at some point I just started nodding my head and saying, "Yes, I'm the Korean American guy," because I got sick and tired of answering all these questions like, where are you from? Where you originally from? Where'd you learn your English from? Where'd your parents learn their English from? And to my surprise, after moving back to Southeast Asia, where I first moved to Singapore, I got a similar flavor of questions being asked to me by both Singaporeans and other Malaysians. They somehow automatically assume I'm Singaporean. I get things like, when you originally moved away from Singapore, why you want to come back from overseas to Singapore now? Why you don't live with your parents now that you're back in Singapore? You can save so much money instead of living in your own place. Why you don't want to go live with your parents? Because they must be aging now. You should be more supportive of your parents and live with them to support them. Like, dude, at some point I kind of tell them people that my parents don't live in Singapore, and they're like, what? Where do they live? And it becomes such a ridiculous conversation after that. So I'm here to clarify that there is actually multiple kinds of Malaysians beyond the stereotypical Malaysian who comes to work in Singapore on a daily basis, commuting across the bridge from JB, a border town across Singapore, into Singapore itself to work for 2,000 Singaporean dollars a month. Now, for those who are not from this region, let me just explain real quick as to what the hell is going on. The story between Singapore and Malaysia, it's kind of like the relationship between the US and Canada, or Australia and New Zealand, or Germany and Austria, or Birmingham and London. Those two, cultures came from the same roots, but they kind of branched off separately over time. But when you look at them today, you can see that there's a lot of similarities between those two different countries, and that's what Singapore and Malaysia are. After the independence from being British colonies in the 50s and 60s, Malaysia and Singapore eventually started developing like a gap in their currency exchange. In the late 90s and early 2000s, you could get 2.2 Malaysian ringgit for one Singaporean dollar. Nowadays, in the last one decade, one Singapore dollar is equivalent to 3+ Malaysian ringgit. So what that means is that it has become a lot more desirable for many Malaysians to go work in Singapore, because when they start earning Singapore dollars, they get 3 ringgit and 30 cents for every one Singapore dollar. So when they spend that money back in Malaysia, their Singaporean salary goes a lot further in purchasing power. Typically, it's 2 times the purchasing power for a lot of things like groceries and your daily cost of living. But it can be even more than that if you're doing things like buying a car or buying property. The prices of those things in Malaysia are a lot cheaper. So imagine that, being a lot cheaper, and you have the currency exchange in your favor as well. A lot of Singaporeans tend to have the stereotype that the average Malaysian has bad English, has so-so education. They might be educated in Malaysia typically, or sometimes even educated locally in Singapore at best. They've never lived abroad before outside of Asia, and they have gone to Singapore to take all the Singaporean jobs. They took our jobs!
They took our jobs! Yeah, they took our...
Which is technically a kind of true stereotype, but that doesn't really apply to all Malaysians, you see. The reason why this is so prominent as a stereotype is because most of the Malaysians who go over to Singapore to work are from the bottom part of the social economic scale. These are people in the lower class, as much as a lot of people don't like me using this word. They're from like the poor families and stuff. They go over to Singapore because that's their only option. And by earning in Singapore, they don't earn like a top salary in Singapore. Not at all. Sometimes it's like at the bottom of the income range as well. Like I said, they sometimes earn like 2,000-3,000 Singaporean dollars a month. But once they convert that into Malaysian ringgit and send it back to their family, It's a lot of money, right? 10,000 ringgit a month is what someone in white collar get paid in the capital city of Malaysia, KL. You also get a lot of like middle class Malaysians who may or may not fall under the same stereotypes, but there's a lot of Malaysians that the average Singaporean does not see and does not interact with on a regular basis, which are the folks in the upper middle class to the upper class in Malaysia, who typically are like overseas educated. They might have a degree from like Australia or the UK or the US, and their family lives in a nice house. They have nice cars. They've gone to a nice school, sometimes even private schools. And these are the kinds of folks who come from backgrounds where they don't have to work and live in Singapore. Some of those people end up doing that, but that's usually for like retarded reasons, like, oh, it's so much safer in Singapore. Singapore's more first world than Malaysia, so I'm gonna move there because it's more better than Malaysia. Like a lot of Malaysians that I know are like that. But there's also another group from that same income societal class who have like, it's never crossed their minds to ever want to move to work or live in Singapore. They're much better off in Malaysia. And the reason why that is because they're earning a shitload more money in Malaysia than they would ever make working for someone else in Singapore. And one of the prime examples is actually from my personal trainer, who's a born and raised Singaporean guy who recently started dating this one chick from JB, which is the border town across from Singapore. She runs her own beauty salon, and he's tried to convince her to want to eventually move over to Singapore to continue, developing their relationship. And she said no because she wants to continue running her business. And he's puzzled because his line of thinking as a classic Singaporean is that why wouldn't this person from Malaysia want to move over to Singapore when it's so desirable with the 3.3 currency exchange rate? I've just given you the answer right there. Those people earn so much money that they don't need to consider Singapore. There are some people who even worked in Singapore early in their lives and moved back to Malaysia, like this one photographer that I know, who earns a boatload of money. He used to work in Singapore when he was younger in a photography studio, and then he moved back to Malaysia, where I estimate he earns something between 50 to 100,000 ringgit a month. That is 12 to 25,000 US dollars a month, which is a buttload of money in Malaysia. He's stankin' rich, but you can't really tell because he runs his business, his photography business, in a random, normal-looking shop house in Malaysia, pretty rundown. He drives like a normal beater Toyota around town. And it's really such an interesting thing that I wanted to talk about because, like I said, I've experienced this so many times from all these different people that I've interacted with. Some of them are even Malaysians, and I often get mistaken as a Singaporean in Malaysia for some strange reason, even till this very day. And a lot of people in Malaysia also think that it's crazy. Like, why would anyone who is living in Singapore want to move back to Malaysia? And again, that is another kind of bottom class, lower class kind of mindset. Right? There's these people in Malaysia who think that working in Singapore is the only way to become rich. They don't realize there's a lot of people in Malaysia who don't have to move to Singapore. Like I said, like there's so many different examples. There's one video that I made some months ago. It's the trading video with a thumbnail with a Mercedes in it. You can watch that one for more information. There's this one guy that I know who does esports betting full time as a job in Malaysia. And he makes so much money that he has a fully paid off home, a car that he could fully pay off today, right, if he wanted to, but it's just on installments for financial liquidity reasons. He has his family that he's raising there. He has his relatives, everyone he knows, his friend circle, everything is there. And he would never consider ever moving to Singapore because he doesn't have to. He's comfortable there. And let me let you in on another secret over here. For people who are wondering in Malaysia how it is that you can earn so much money in Malaysia, the answer is by not working for someone else. What I've noticed is that there's a lot of these people who, let's say, are hanging out at the malls on a weekday in Malaysia, who drive fancy cars and are just like, why do you think it's so congested at weird times in KL, like 11 a.m. or like 3 p.m. in the middle of the afternoon? Those aren't people who are working for someone else in an office. Those are people who are working for themselves. They may or may not have employees, right? They may or may not be running their own business or just freaking going solo esports betting in their underwear from home. They're not working for someone else. That's the secret to not having to work in Singapore. Because why work in Singapore when you can make a buttload more money not having to deal with a toxic boss, yada, 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 in Malaysia? And that's something that a lot of Singaporeans don't realize as well. So I hope this video was very informative and eye-opening to you. I know whenever I tell this to Singaporeans that I know, especially in real life, their mind is just... That's it for today, and I hope you learned something. See you all in the next video. Goodbye.